Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, number 1472. Whew, we're getting up there in numbers, aren't we? Today's episode is called In the Footsteps of Your Ancestors, and we'll be looking at some of the why you should you explore the footsteps of your ancestors, how to do that, and maybe some of the benefits of it, or something like that. That's kind of what we're going to talk about. So I hope you all had a fantastic day today. I got my mastermind group meeting today. It was amazing. My head's so full of stuff, I just fell asleep on the couch. So yes, so I'm still a little waking up from that, but that's okay, because I am here and we're talking about in the footsteps of your ancestors. And what is it? Well, excuse me, I thought I had a stuck burp. Walking in the footsteps of your ancestors is it's to do with working on your genealogy, working on the family history. And if you've got DNA matching in there as well, you can work on that too. And it's kind of like, okay, well, you got genealogy, DNA, and family history. What's the difference? Okay, well, genealogy is the facts and the figures. It's the names, the dates, the name of the person, where and when they were born, where and when they died. Sorry, somebody is back to full 100%. She's playing with toys now. Sorry, Zeffie had a dental visit the other day and was, of course, knocked out. So now she's back to health. There may be a squeaky toy or two appearing very soon. So anyway, okay. So back to the thing. DNA shows that you are blood related. It does the blood relation thing. It doesn't show you how you are related. It just shows that you are related. Genealogy shows you how you are related in the facts and the figures, with the dates of the when and the where they were born, when and where they died, when and when they got married, those sorts of things, and their name, who they got married to, who their children were, if their children got married, did their children die when they were young, and things like this. So it gives you the facts and the figures, the names, the facts and figures. That's genealogy. Family history is taking, this is the year they were born, this is the year they died, where the family history fills in the dash. And those of you who have not heard about the dash or read the poem of the dash, just go onto YouTube and Google the dash. And there's beautiful videos there where they actually they read the poem, the dash. And the dash is, here is your year of birth, your year of death. What did you do in that piece in between? You've got that dash between the dates. How did you live your dash? And family history is filling in that dash as much as we can with the tools and researches that are available about how we can fill in that dash for our ancestors. Learning about, what was the time, what were the times like, what was happening on around them, what did they do during their lifetime, what occupation did they have? Oh, excuse me. Sorry, there's a head underneath the curtain. It's okay, Zeffie. Just wait. Sorry. So it's that dash. And that dash is what we're looking for when we go in search of when we go in the footsteps of our ancestors. It's that dash. That is that little piece, that little line that you see between the birth year and the death year. That's what we're looking at when we head in the footsteps of your ancestors. I love doing things that involve looking up about my ancestry and things like that, places that you can go, things that they've been. It is, maybe seeing the house that they grew up in, seeing the school that they attended, learning about the history of some historical event that took place and their role in that historical event. I was thinking earlier today, I thought, what's a story I could tell about this? So we'll explore that a little bit as we go on. So you'll get some things. Like, I remember going past the house, my parents drove me up to this place, went up this steep hill in Dunedin, And there was a street off to the right-hand side there. We go down this little dead-end street, and the second house from the corner, my mum turns around as we drove into this dead-end street. Like us kids, we're just on this exploration around Dunedin. We have no idea where we're going. But we got up to Steep Street, and you find a lot of those in Dunedin, by the way, including the world's steepest street. Well, steepest road. Yes, we'll talk more about that one later. And we take this right-hand turn into this dead-end street. My dad goes down the end and turns around and comes back again and parks in front of this house. And my mum turns to us kids and goes, "That's where my father grew up." And we're like, "What?" And I said, "That's where Papa was." And he goes, "Yeah." And so I was looking at this little house, at this house that was, well, he wasn't born in Dunedin. He was born further down the road, down the coast. If you can hear my dog whining, chattering in the background, I apologize. She wants to play, and I'm online. And so she goes, "No, this is the house that he grew up in. It's where he used to, where he lived while he went to school, and that sort of thing." And I was looking at this little house and going, "That is so cool." And I kind of got this like little shiver down my spine, thinking that is really neat. And my grandfather was still alive at the time as well. And so we go out the end of that street and we turn right, and so you have his house was here. This is the house on the corner. Then there's a house in behind here, and behind this house here there was this hedge, and there was this head poking above the hedge looking over to see what's going on. And the top of this head, I go, "Mum," she goes, "What?" I said, "That looks like Corky." And Corky was a character in a British TV series called Sykes, and Corky was the local policeman, and that was his name. And Sykes were about this brother and a sister who had grown up over the years, and they were living together in their retirement years and stuff, and Corky was the local policeman. And I said, "That looks like Corky." And and so after that road trip, if you could see this tail wag going on down here, it is amazing. Can I please have this? You're feeling better now, huh? Yeah. And so it was a few weeks later, we're up at my grandfather's place, and we're sitting there and we're telling him this about our adventures that we've been on, and because he knew we'd done this trip down the South Island. I said, "And Papa, guess what?" He goes, "What?" I said, "We saw the house that you grew up in." And he goes, "Oh, on such in the name of the street and all that." We go, "Yeah." And I said, and we went, and when we came out into the street, we went right, and there was a hedge, and there was this man's head looking over the hedge. And I said, and it looked like Corky from the TV series Sykes. And he looks at me and he says, "Well, do you want to know something?" I said, "What?" And he said his last name is actually Sykes. And I was like, "What?" And he said, if you had gone and knocked on his door and explained who you were, he would have invited you in for a cup of tea. And I was just like, that is too cool. So just by going to an area where my grandfather grew up, and there was a family there who would have remembered who he was, and they would have invited us in for a cup of tea. And I was like, that is so cool. So that was one trip that we did that involved a house that an ancestor of mine lived in. So you can when you're looking at following in the footsteps of your ancestors and stuff, this has actually been a rise in popularity over the last few years with the global pause going on. People have been stuck at home and not anywhere to go. And so now they're sort of becoming interested, well, who are we? Where do we come from? So there's been this growing rise in genealogy, and especially with the DNA coming out as well, there's been a rise in people wanting to do their DNA matches to see if are they related to other people and things. And so there's been a huge rise in that as people now start exploring in the footsteps of their ancestors. That's the first thing, is the introduction to it all. So number 2 is the importance of understanding your roots. This is a feeling of connection with those who came before you. And what was I looking at the other day? Somebody said that we are the ancestors of our future generations. I thought, oh yeah, we are. We are the ancestors of our future generation. I'm always looking at the aspect of looking back and seeing, who did I come from? Where will they come from? Where do I get these different traits within our family? Where do these traits come from? And yet I'm not thinking that, I am, my future generation, although I don't have any children of my own. but just thinking, that we are the ancestors of our future generations. I'm like, that's a very true statement. But when you're understanding where you come from, it gives you a sense of identity. You turn around and when you're working through that family history, which is that dash portion, and filling out that story and finding about the stories of your ancestors and things, who were they? Where did they come from? It gives you a sense of identity, and you can start to understand there are patterns that maybe have been repeated through your family that don't come out until you're looking at the history side of things. Excuse me. So you can also look at what historical events took place during your ancestors' lifetime. What was the culture like at that time? What were their traditions? Some of those get passed down through generation after generation. There are some cultures out there where there are these traditions that have been around for centuries and centuries because that is their culture. This is what's been passed down from generation to generation to generation. So what do you have in your family that's been passed down from generation to generation to generation? How does a historical event impact your family? Like I was sitting here earlier and I was trying to think, what can something be about a historical event and how did that shape who people were or that they got to witness? There's all these different events that have gone on in history with wars and pandemics and depression, the time of the depression, and low economics and the time of being wealthy and all of that sort of thing. And there's just all the stuff that's going on, landing on the moon and assassinations that have taken place, just all the stuff that has gone on in our, in the Earth's lifetime that we are just a tiny speck of, but we have a part that has an impact on history. And looking at these historical events, who in your family was around during that, what was their recollection of that? Like, we just had in May, we had the coronation of, was it May? Yeah, it was May. Hang on. Yeah. In May, we had the coronation of King Charles III. And the last coronation was 70 years ago, back in 2nd of June, 1953, when Queen Elizabeth had her coronation. And that's right, May 6th of this year, had her coronation. That was 70 years ago. Well, my parents were at the age where they would remember things like that. But what got me is that when I was watching this live before the procession started and everything else, they're out there talking with people, with the people in the crowds that were lining the streets of London and talking with them. There was this woman who was in her 90s who had lived through this was her third coronation that she was going to see, her third. And I was sort of like, that is amazing. Because when you think about, there was one that we're about to witness there on May 6th. The last coronation was 70 years ago in 1953, in June of 1953. The one before that was in 1937, which was King Charles VI coming to the throne and being coronated. Now, she could have almost seen 4, but King Edward VIII abdicated before his coronation, so there wasn't actually a coronation for him. But she saw him become king, saw him remember his abdication, and then saw King Charles VI standing. King George VI get coronated in 1937, and then saw Queen Elizabeth be coronated in 1953, and now she was seeing King Charles being coronated in 2023, and she was in her 90s. And she can remember little bits, she can remember things from the different ones where she used to, again, line the streets of London to watch the parade, to watch all the traditions being observed that take place with coronations and things, and the carriages and stuff that have been around for centuries. So that was kind of like, wow, that is really cool. Imagine witnessing 3, almost 4 coronations. So yeah, that was, do you have anybody in your family tree that was around during those times? And I spoke to my parents about them. We're on a Zoom call. I said to them, what do you remember about Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 1953? And Mum was like, well, I said, what was it like when King Charles VI, when King George VI passed away and Princess Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth II? And they turned around and they said, well, we don't remember much, because you have to remember, we didn't have TV back then. Everything was done over the radio. And she says, and Mum was sort of like, I don't really remember much about the announcement of King George VI passing away. She says, I remember with the coronation, that we sat around the radio and listened to it, because that's how they got communication in those days with the radio. They would sit around the radio and hear people describing what was going on with the processions and in the ceremonies and that sort of thing with Queen Elizabeth's coronation. And so it was interesting to see the perspective of what it was like back in 1953 when that coronation took place, and then compared to the coronation now that you actually got to witness on television. So that was kind of interesting to see. They were 8 or 9 years old, and sitting around the radio to listen to what was going on with the coronation. And then years later, they actually getting to see it on TV, live on TV in full color. So it was interesting, those perspectives. So you've got to remember, what were their times like at that time, and how do they remember it? What do they remember about it? How old were they at the time that this took place? Ways that you can trace your ancestral footsteps. You've got traveling to ancestral homes. First of all, you have to find out where and when they lived, at what time did they live there. Census reports, especially if they came from England or here in America or Canada, Scotland, all that, they had the census reports which gave their addresses during certain times. And so you could look up that information. You could look up what lands look up deed records to see what lands did they own at the time and where were they located. So it makes it easier for you to trace back in time and things. And one of the trips I want to do is up to Indiana, which is where my mother-in-law's father's side of the family settled when they came over from Germany. They settled in Indiana. And so my thing with that is I'd love to go and see if the homestead is still standing to this day. I've seen photographs of the house that they were raised in, that my mother-in-law's father was raised in until they moved down to Texarkana, Arkansas. And so just seeing, is that homestead still standing today? Because they got that homestead in the 1830s, 1840s, I think it was, 1830s, 1840s, somewhere around there. They got that land that they put the homestead on. So is that still standing today? Is it still there? Has it been pulled down? Is there now a bigger ranch there, than a bigger farmland there than there used to be? What is it like today? I know that my parents, when they went to England, they went and visit. My dad's side of the family comes from an area called Warboys, which it was in Huntingdonshire, which is now part of Cambridge. And back in the day, back in the 1800s, my dad's family lived in this place in Warboys that was called the Manor. And it was this, well, in those days, it was a very large house. Today, not so, more average size, I would guess. But in the front yard, there was a church with a churchyard next to it, which is where some of my dad's ancestors are buried. So my ancestors are buried. And they've got photographs of all the tombstones and the headstones and the monuments with the names of the relatives listed on there as well. And then the manor is behind that. And they actually had set up an appointment with the gentleman who owns the manor. I don't know if he still owns it, but this was back when they went over, who owned the manor. And they made an appointment to go and visit with him. And he took them on a tour of the manor house, and explained to them about the condition it was in when he purchased it. The people before him had turned it all into this Italian style inside, and he renovated it back to what it was like. And he had photos, and he had this kind of like a brochure typed up of, this is the history of the house. Here are the families who lived in the house during the house's lifetime, from this year to this year, and all of that, when it sold and everything else, and who the different owners were. And he had photographs in there of different rooms of the house. This is before he renovated. This is after he renovated. And after he renovated is more like what it would have looked like when these other people would have owned the place. So my parents got to go in that. And the one thing that got preserved, I think it was the only thing that got preserved from the original thing, was the staircase. And this is a gorgeous, gorgeous staircase. And I can still see that staircase in my head. I've never visited. I've only seen the photographs of the place. So that's one place I want to go. When I go up to Scotland, see the lands of my Scottish ancestors. If I go to Ireland, see the lands of my Irish ancestors. When I go down to Cornwall, and that's in that little spit off the bottom end of England there, going and visiting the place. I have relatives, I have ancestors from both sides of my family tree that came from Cornwall. So, being able to go and visit those places, and you find out the history. And when you go and visit the places where your ancestors came from, you may still be able to get to see the house that they actually lived in, if it's still around. And in some cases, especially if you're in England and places in Europe, that that is quite a possibility that you'll be able to get to see the actual house that they lived in. You can see, if you know what their occupation was, you could see maybe where they worked. You could learn the history of the area and find out what was going on at the time, especially if you're in the last known place that they were in. Say, like for me, in England, why did they go down to New Zealand and Australia? Well, some of them went down to Australia first and then came across to New Zealand. What was going on at the time where they decided to uproot everything from England and head halfway around the world to Australia and New Zealand? Why? And finding out that history of what was going on at the time and why would they want to leave those areas. So it's a way to discover history, and you can actually use it as a bonding exercise with your own family when you go and visit these places and experience the areas that your ancestors grew up in. So when you're experiencing the ancestral journey, which is number 4 of our list, did I tell you these were numbered? I don't think I did. I'm sorry. You're walking through these areas, which is places that your ancestors have actually walked through. And that can be a very surreal moment when you see things like that and you're walking in places where they had walked. In Wellington, there's a house that my mother's mother grew up in. And my mum told, and she says, "I'll see that," and pointed out to this house that was on the side of the hill. And I said, "Yeah." She said, that's where Nana grew up. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then she told me the story that Nana had always told, is that her grandmother, my second great-grandmother, had come back, my grandmother's grandmother, had come back from Australia from visiting her son in prison. And then a few weeks later, she passed away. And they couldn't lay her on the table because the table was too small. So they took the door off the pantry, laid that on the table, and then put my second great-grandmother on the table and prepared her for burial on there. And I was like, well, that's a really cool story. But it kind of gave you a little chills every time you saw the house, that there was that had happened in there. And do the people who live there in that house today, do they know that history? So it gives you a different perspective on things as well. When you're experiencing your ancestral, things from your ancestors, like the places that they lived, the places that they walked, the places that they worked, were there any recipes that were passed down through generations? Do you have any family recipes that have been passed down through generations? Why not do like a cooking exercise, a cooking thing one time, and doing a taste, just bake up all the stuff that comes from your great-grandmother's cookbook or something, and do a tasting of these recipes and things, or trying them out. Are there traditions and celebrations and crafts from the ancestral heritage that have been passed down through generations? What do you have in your house that's been passed down? Currently in a box that I have yet to unpack, because it's a fragile box, and I'm sort of like, I'm not sure if I want to unpack it or not. But in there is a plate with a saucer and a cup that my grandmother gave to her mother. So my great-grandmother, when she, my grandmother, when she was 16, gave her mother this plate, saucer, and teacup for my great-grandmother's birthday. I now have that, and it's kind of cool every time I think of that, because I knew Granny. It's the one great-grandmother that I ever got to meet. So I knew Granny, and picturing her drinking out of this, using this plate and this cup and saucer, I can see that very clearly. And to think of my grandmother as a 16-year-old girl giving that to her mother as a birthday present, I thought that was kind of cool, because what would this have cost her in those days? And did she have to save up for it? Was it something she could afford, or did she have to work for it and save up for it? So what is the story behind this teacup and saucer, with this teacup, saucer, and a plate? So there's these sorts of things that have been passed down through generations. What is the story behind it? I have a barometer trying to remember what wood. I think it's made out of oak. But I have a barometer that was my, I have to remember which one. My great-grandfather's or great-great-grandfather's. I think it's from my dad's side. It's from my dad's side of the family. And also I have that. I also have a tapestry, like a cross stitch, that's of a knight on a horse with his shield and his those long jousting thing. That my great grandfather, again, I can't remember if it's one great or two greats, did. So I had a grandfather who did this cross stitch that hung up in the dining area of my grandparents' house. And so after they both passed away, it was taken out of the frame and given to me. And I was like, that's really cool, because I'd always liked that cross stitch. So it's these little things that you've been passed down through generations. What is the story behind them? I have some macrame necklaces that my grandfather made, my dad's father made, and a couple that he gave me. And he learned to do macrame after some medical incident or something where he couldn't get up and walk around a lot. So he learned to do something with his hands, and that's what he learned to do, was macrame. And he made these really cool necklaces that was out of macrame. And, I still have them to this day. So some of the benefits of connecting with your, number 5, we got the benefits of connecting with your ancestral paths is it gives you an insight into who you are and where you've come from. The further back you go, the more you get to know the people, and you can see the patterns of what has been passed down through the generations. So you can see that it strengthens family bonds, especially if you've got like cousins and stuff that get in on the walk within the ancestral paths and stuff. It can help you connect with your ancestors, and it can actually help provide comfort, knowing the life that they had and now they're at peace for it. Did they have a rough life and now they're at peace? And then it's taking that information and educating your children about their heritage. Where did they come from? And some of these stories, you then create the tradition. My favorite thing to do was to take the photo album, and I would, in my dad's parents' place, they had this, in their living room, they had this little like nook area. And in there, they had this stand that had the photo albums on it. And there was a couple of at the bottom. And these are the black photo albums. They have the black pages on them, and they have the little white corner things that the photographs would sit in. And I remember like lifting up the corners of those and looking for the photographs of the stories that I liked, and going up to them and asking them to tell me the stories behind the photographs. So that was one thing I remember doing. And that was a way that I could learn about my heritage and where I'd come from, and the people who were in my lineage that I didn't even know. And at the time, I didn't know that's what I was doing. So you can, and also too, you get to learn about the struggles and the triumphs that your ancestors had, that can inspire your own personal resilience. I come from a long line of service. I've got my dad was a first responder. My mum was a nurse. Her parents, one worked with charities. My grandfather was a lay minister. On my dad's side of the family, his dad fought in World War I along with his brothers. World War II along with his brothers. My grandmother was a Women's Auxiliary Air Force, which was the Air Force support, the Royal New Zealand Air Force support that stayed here in New Zealand, but supported so the men were free to go overseas, and they did that back here. And so she served there. Her brothers fought in World War II. My grandfather's father was fought in World War I, and he was the captain of one of the forts that overlooked the entry into Wellington Harbour in New Zealand. So there's this history going back of service in some way or another. And so I'm always looking to serve people and assist them with things as well. So their stories, the stories that they have all had, things that they have overcome, struggles that they have overcome, they inspire me. People are always looking to people outside of their family to inspire them when they could have their own heroes and stories of inspiration within their own family. if they knew where to go and look to find these stories and things, and learn how to search for the family history, that, you know, that dash, to search for the information for that dash. And so number 7, we're looking at conclusion and encouragement. It is, you know, not sure what that sound was. You can look at the impact that your ancestors have had on who you are today. Looking at that, oh, that was you. Okay. Sorry, I'm hearing weird noises. I'm like, what? Yeah, you can explore your heritage, find out who you come from. Another way that, another thing when you're exploring your heritage that just popped into my head right now is that when you're looking at their information and things, when you look at their death certificates, you can find the cause of death, and you can start to see, is there a pattern that I need to be aware of that has happened in my family? You know, is there something that's been passed down through the generations on the health side that has caused these people to pass? You know, what did they pass from? Is there a pattern there? Is there something that I need to be aware of so I can prepare, so I can take the best care of myself to maybe avoid that? When Nicole comes on, she talks about, oh, what was it? She talks about how, what she does with the way that she eats and exercises and things, about how it keeps this one gene turned off. And I think it's, her family's predisposed to, oh, I can't remember what I have to ask her on Tuesday night. But there's a predisposition for this particular illness, and through what she does with the functional blood work and what she does with nutrition and things, helps keep that gene turned off. So there's ways that you can find that out and learn, like Nicole has, how to keep that particular gene turned off. So going for walks through your ancestry, back through your history and things, where did they come from? What obstacles did they face along the way? What was their culture like? What was the environment like that they were living in? That that could be a reason behind why they left. Brad's family, his father's family, came over from the Ukraine, Lithuania, and Russia because of religious persecutions. They were Jewish, and so they basically left for the sake of their lives. You know, there's these sorts of stories. What obstacles did they come over? You know, what did they overcome? So, you know, we've gone through, well, I'm way over time. We've looked at the introduction to genealogy and ancestry. We've talked about the importance of understanding your roots, ways to trace your footsteps with different records and DNA bases. Oh, we didn't actually really talk about much of that, did we? Got more stuck in the stories. How to experience your ancestral journey through things like doing cooking recipes, things that have been passed down through the generations, benefits of connecting with your ancestral past, the challenges and ethical considerations that you have to have. I will tell you this, there are things that you're going to come along, that you're going to discover along this way, be it through DNA testing, be it through the records that you find, that there's going to be stuff that makes you extremely uncomfortable or shocks you. Things are going to come up that's sort of like, oh, that's not the story I've been told. Those sorts of things are going to come up. There's going to be unexpected things that are going to come up and are going to make you uncomfortable. And whenever you're doing any research of any type, be it genealogical, be it DNA, or researching the family history, you have to be prepared for the unexpected. And so that just sort of like wraps up everything for us. But I encourage you to go out there and engage with your heritage in whatever way feels meaningful and accessible to you. What is it you want to find? And create that question, you know, who is my great-grandfather? Whichever one you want to pick, because every generation doubles. So there's you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and I run out of fingers here, 8 great-grandparents, 16 second great-grandparents, 32 third great-grandparents, and it just keeps doubling. Every generation it will double. So that's a lot of people. So what part are you going to go and explore and have a look at? Is there one particular person you're going to concentrate on that you're really interested in their story? There's something about them that you're interested in their story. My second great grandmother, which is my mother's grandmother on her maternal side, she had a very interesting, that's the one that passed away that got laid out on the pantry door. There's something about her that I want to go and find more information about. So she's one person that I'm concentrating on to see what information can I find out about her. And so that's what I'm doing, is walking in her footsteps as much as I can to learn more about her, who she was as a person, because I know that she had a rough time coming up. I heard somewhere along the way that she was forced into marriage. Why? You know, was it her first husband she was forced to marry, or was it her second husband she was forced to marry? Because her first husband died in a mining accident, so in New Zealand. And so I want to find out more about because I heard a rumor that she was forced into marriage. So was it her first marriage or her second marriage that she was forced into, and why? And I already know the story behind one of her sons, who was he was evil. And it's sort of like, how, why, what caused him to go off the rails when everybody else in the family seems so normal? So there's these little stories that come around in the family that you want to go and investigate. So take the time to go for a walk in your ancestors' in the footsteps of your ancestors, be it visiting the lands, filling in that dash of their lives and finding out the stories behind those people and learning more about who they were and what traits have you inherited from them. So it's always an interesting thing to go and do. So that's my challenge for you, is go and walk in the footsteps of your ancestors. Anyway, I'm out of here. Go have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we will catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hei konara.